You take one hit, nothing happens. 10 seconds pass, then the room feels different. Colors seem a little brighter. Time stretches. A song you have heard 100 times suddenly sounds new. You think this is happening in your lungs or maybe your blood. It is not. It is happening in a part of your brain that has been waiting for this exact moment for millions of years. Because your brain was not designed to respond to marijuana. It was designed to respond to something your own body already makes. And the plant just happens to fit the lock perfectly. Here is the strange part almost nobody knows. Your brain has a built-in cannabis system. Scientists call it the endocannabinoid system, and it existed in humans long before anyone ever smoked anything. Endocannabinoid just means internal cannabis-like molecule. Your body produces its own versions of the chemicals found in marijuana in tiny amounts all the time. Why would evolution build that in? Because these internal molecules help regulate some of the most basic functions you have. Mood, appetite, memory, pain, sleep, even the sense of time itself. When you eat something delicious, your brain releases a small dose of these compounds. When you finish a hard workout, that same system helps produce what people call runner's high. Researchers at institutions like Johns Hopkins have spent years mapping exactly where these receptors sit inside the brain, and the map is not random. It shows up almost everywhere thought and feeling happen. So when THC, the active compound in marijuana, enters your bloodstream, it is not introducing something foreign. It is flooding a system that already exists at a dose far higher than your body would ever produce on its own. Think of it like this. Your brain has thousands of tiny locks scattered across it. Your body makes its own small, gentle keys. THC is a key shaped almost exactly the same way, except much larger, and pressed into every lock at once. That is why the high feels the way it does. Not like something alien, like something familiar, turned up far past its normal volume. So, where exactly does THC go first? It heads straight for a region called the hippocampus. This is your brain's memory center, the place responsible for stitching new experiences into long-term storage. THC binds heavily here, and it slows the process down. This is why people high on marijuana often lose the thread of a conversation mid-sentence, or forget why they walked into a room. It is not that the memory disappears. It is that the hippocampus briefly struggles to file it away in the first place. Next, THC moves into the amygdala, the brain's alarm system. This is the region that decides, often in a fraction of a second, whether something is dangerous. In most people, activating cannabinoid receptors here turns the alarm down. Anxiety fades. Worries that felt urgent an hour ago suddenly feel distant, almost comical. But here is the twist almost nobody talks about. In some people, especially at higher doses, the exact same region reacts the opposite way. The alarm gets louder instead of quieter. This is why two people can smoke the same amount of the same strain, and one feels blissfully relaxed while the other spirals into paranoia. Why the difference? Researchers studying cannabis, including teams publishing through the National Institute on Drug Abuse, point to a mix of genetics, existing anxiety levels, and even the ratio of THC to another cannabis compound called CBD. Higher CBD content tends to soften THC's more anxious edge. Lower CBD, higher THC, and the odds of that opposite reaction climb. Then there is the strangest effect of all. Time itself seems to bend. Ask someone high on marijuana to estimate how long a song lasted, and they will often guess far longer than the actual length. A 3-minute song might feel like 6. Neuroscientist Dean Bonamano, who has spent years researching how the brain tracks time, points to the cerebellum and basal ganglia as key players here. These regions act almost like an internal metronome, counting out the passage of time in the background of everything you do. THC disrupts that internal clock. It does not stop it, it just makes it run at a different, less reliable pace. Your brain is still counting, it is only counting wrong. And then there is the reward system, the part of this story that explains why marijuana can be so pleasurable, and why for some people it becomes so hard to put down. THC triggers a release of dopamine in a region called the nucleus accumbens. This is the same reward pathway activated by food, sex, music, and nearly every other pleasurable experience your brain has ever reinforced. Every time that pathway fires, your brain quietly makes a note. This felt good. Remember how you got here? Over time, with frequent heavy use, something else happens. The brain begins to notice that cannabinoid receptors are constantly being triggered from the outside, and it adapts by producing fewer of its own natural receptors. Scientists call this downregulation. This is one reason regular users often report needing more to feel the same effect. It is not that the drug becomes weaker, it is that the lock has started rearranging itself. The teenage brain reacts differently than the adult brain, and this part matters. A landmark study led by researcher Madeline Meyer followed over 1,000 people from childhood into adulthood, tracking cannabis use over decades. The study found that people who began using marijuana heavily as teenagers and continued into adulthood showed measurable declines in IQ by their late 30s, an average of about 6 points even after accounting for education. People who started using in adulthood showed no similar decline. Why the difference? Because the adolescent brain is still under construction. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for judgment, planning, and impulse control, is not fully wired until the mid-20s. Introducing a compound that reshapes cannabinoid receptor activity during that construction window appears to leave a different mark than introducing it once the wiring is finished. So, what does all of this actually add up to? Marijuana does not create a new experience inside your brain. It borrows a system you were already born with, one built by evolution to fine-tune mood, memory, hunger, and time, and it turns every dial on that system up at once. Sometimes that feels euphoric. Sometimes it feels foggy. Sometimes, depending on your biology, your age, or your dose, it feels like anxiety instead of calm. Either way, the high was never really coming from outside you. It was your own ancient internal chemistry, briefly given a much louder voice than it ever intended to use. You took one hit. Nothing happened, then your own brain did the rest.